gorgeous Cami, who's behind the camera, as well as my stepmother, Nicole, who found this property in the middle of nowhere about 20 years ago with my father and has been working with the family to restore it back to health for the last few decades.
Thank you. And I'm going to start this off just by trying to situate you in this very particular place, but I have a lot of competition with all the crickets behind me, so I'm going to, hopefully you'll hear everything because it's a perfect day in Provence. Couldn't be more beautiful weather. So thank you for being with us. The Wi-Fi could cut off a couple of times, but only for a few seconds, so bear with us.
So Nicole, what is so special to you about this place? Like, where on earth are we, for one thing?
Well, we are officially in the middle of nowhere. We are in a very remote corner of Provence, which is on the wine map, part of the southern Rhone of the wine region, on the same latitude as Châteauneuf-du-Pape, but way up in the mountains above Gigondas. So that altitude is going to play a huge bearing on the style of wines that we decided to make. And just to give you an idea, this is the famous Chêne Bleu that we named the wine after. So in French that means blue oak. And this tree we're very fond of. We painted it with copper sulfide to protect it in a drought, and it became a fitting metaphor for our desire to protect and preserve the history, the authenticity, and the very pulsating nature of this wild land. So you're going to see over here the medieval vegetable garden. So over here is where we decided to go looking for how the people who lived on this property for centuries before us lived in complete autonomy. And we actually found those ruins and rebuilt the garden. So we have a wonderful farm-to-table restaurant now. And over here, I can give you an idea of the beehives that we work with because that's an important part of our project as well.
Wait, but hang on a sec. I thought vines were self-pollinating, so why do we need the beehives next to the vineyard like this?
What a great question, Danielle. Actually, they're central to our sustainability program. So sustainability is because we're very conscious of sustainability in everything we do. This is a UNESCO biosphere. You see the forest behind us. This is a very specific enclave that has crazy biodiversity. And we work very hard to protect that, but also to work with the forces of nature in the vineyard. So what we're doing now is a research project with top scientists from around the world to try to show if bees can make better wine. The theory is that if you have an organically, biodynamically, sustainably farmed vineyard, you have all these wonderful cover crops between the rows. And those are great because although the vines may be mostly self-pollinating, the cover crops, 80 to 90% are needing bees in order to pollinate. So the bees develop the cover crops. Those in turn are a fantastic habitat for microorganisms. Now there's been so much exciting research coming out about the role of microorganisms in every field, but specifically in viticulture, giving a way to really transmit that sense of place. They break down that famous terroir and make it into nutrients that are very useful and absorbable by the plants. So that, by giving the wines a better sense of place, allows you to aspire to make really fine wine, Grand Cru quality.
And what is so special about the terroir exactly where we are here?
This is actually such an interesting enclave because we have all that fabulous sun that you get in the south of France, but because we're so high up, the secret ingredient is the altitude, which is giving natural freshness. It's also giving a fantastic ageability on the wine. And of course, that opens the door to making wines that have a very particular aging profile. That's exciting for us because the ability to age our Grand Cru quality wines, the flagships, is a very important thing that affects the way we try to make those wines. And lastly, what you're going to see soon is that this area is actually the bottom of the European tectonic plate smashing into the top of Africa and pushing the edge of the plate on its side, revealing these stratogeographies, which are Jurassic, Triassic, Cretaceous, that are normally hundreds of miles, at least a couple miles underground. And that, in turn, makes for a really interesting mineral finish on the wines. So we'll take a closer look later at some of the rocks that we have, but we think that gives a style to the wines that is really quite unique.
So you're saying you can literally see the edge of the tectonic plate right here in front of us.
This is a great place to take a look. You can see the Saint-Amand mountain, which is part of the Dentelle de Montmirail, and over there in the distance, the famous Mont Ventoux. It's called the Giant of Provence, and it is very symbolic in this area, very much tied in to its history, because the Celtic tribes would come from the northern part of Italy and set up shop here in order to worship the bull god, the Vintour, which gave its name to Ventoux. So now we're getting closer to the house, and in this area, you're going to see that you have a good view of this little natural amphitheater, and we decided to put in a bunch of creature comforts so that when you come and visit us, which I hope is soon, you'll get an idea of really taking in this very intense, very special. A lot of people to the area, including the Templar monks and others for many centuries.
And I mean, also drew our family, because I mean, you're from Manhattan. How did you find yourself here working with the family in the middle of nowhere? And you know, anyone that's met you at wine fairs or at the house can see you've just poured your heart and your soul into making this, you know, a hub for a wine experience, for winemaking, for sustainability. How did you come to that conclusion?
I was originally one of the most unlikely people to transplant here. I had fallen in love with my husband, who was very passionate about, had just found this place. And I think anyone who comes into contact with so much history, so much incredible nature, and such an incredible potential for making top quality wines would have also fallen in love. And what do we think we did here is work very hard for a long time, trying to get all that history to come. So we're going now into the oldest part of the property. This is actually from the Middle Ages. This main part here, it's a little bit dark at first, but you can see here that now we're in the 13th century pavilion, and you can see that for centuries they were making wine here. In fact, here are some of the old tanks that they had, the open air tanks, and we spent a lot of time with the local historian trying to get a lot of that know-how about what used to happen here for the centuries. So we recreated in this room, with his help and research, the 4 seasons at La Verrière: winter, fall, spring, and summer. So I spent a lot of time becoming a pop-up medievalist, and I found that was so fascinating to always do things in keeping with this sort of medieval meets modern mindset. So now we're going to take a quick peek into the oldest part of the house. And we're going by the kitchen here, which is where our Michelin-trained chef usually works. And it's very important for us to have food and wine pairing at the highest level. So right now we're going up into the 9th century vaulted room, and we have a lot of events here, private dinners, and it's a very wonderful space for concerts as well, because the acoustics are fantastic. I don't know if that was done on purpose, but we love filling the house with music.
So there's obviously quite a considerable sort of attention to detail in terms of the medieval roots of the property. And I think, as many people know, the names of our top 2 cuvées, Abelard and Eloise, are named after medieval lovers. So tell us, how did that come about? How did their story end up becoming so much of a part of our planet and mythology?
Well, I was so taken with their story because although they were the most famous lovers in the Middle Ages, we also found as we got to know their story better that they were super modern. They were one of the original power couples of history, and they were both so accomplished in their own areas but also had this very interesting relationship with each other. So we thought that would be a great foundation to show the backbone, central contradiction at the heart of this property, which is that we're so far south and so high up that we have this kind of, and we thought it made a lot of sense to try to showcase those two pieces of the identity. So now we're coming up onto the winery, and this is the only building that we actually added. So we're going to be going in the side door here and taking you through the agricultural part. So obviously here's where we keep most of our farm equipment, but we also have some older equipment here, harkening back to the roots of the property. We're now coming in the side door. Hello, Dan. He's the star of the show. So here we've come in the side, and I thought it would be fun to switch around a little bit and tell you, to have Dani show you a little bit about the winemaking, which she's also very passionate about. And maybe Dani, why don't you tell me about these big tanks that we have right
So
here?
one of the things I love about working in this space is that the beauty about being a relatively new producer and starting from scratch, because of course there are many challenges, but the beauty is you really get to think about the whole winemaking system from scratch, which is why, as you'll see, we've actually taken the time to make a gravity-fed system. So you can see we have some wooden fermenters, some food here on the left-hand side. And the idea is, by thinking about the process from scratch, we were able to make sure we had enough space for enough cuve to do some real precision winemaking. So what does that mean? That means we get to decide where the best parcella, the best characteristics of those parcella, and then we get to vinify them separately to bring out their unique properties. Of course, that then means when it comes to blending, we have a lot more material to work with. And one of the fun parts of working that way is that we got to use lots of different kinds of tanks. So you can see we have some 15, 20, and 25 hectolitre wooden fermenters, food that we use for the vinification of our top parcel for Abelard and Eloise. But funnily enough, if you also look on the ground here, these are the tops of the tanks that we'll see as we go down a floor. So the fruit comes in at this level, and then we're very easily just able to sort of tip it into a tank. And having seen the way that some other wineries work, this is a complete godsend from a number of perspectives. From a health and safety perspective, I've seen many, interns strapped to a forklift trying to get all of the fruit in from the vintage over and above a tank. But on the second hand, it also means that we're able to respect the quality of the must as it comes in by moving it around as little as possible. So we're now going down the floor.
What do we have here? These are, this is the second floor. Why don't you tell us a bit about why we have so many small tanks here?
The idea is that we have as many different tanks as possible for fresher, more fruit-forward cuvées, for instance, the Viognier, or a number of other wines that we make. And by having as many different tanks as possible, what that means is, as I said, we can nurture the unique characteristics of each of these tanks and have much more to work with at blending. So moving now to the depths of the winery, down to a third level, down into the heart and soul of the winemaking.
So why don't you tell us about these tanks, but also while we're here, why don't we take a moment to mention the rosé, because that's an important part of our production.
Absolutely. One of the things that my family decided to do from the very first vintage, which I think was really inspired, was the idea of making a rosé with structure, complexity, ageability, something you can drink in winter, year-round, at the dinner table. And we actually use some of our oldest Grenache vines that are about 65 years old in order to create the backbone of that blend. And so for us, that's important because I think rosé has for too long been swept to one side as something you just have, you know, by a pool or by the sea, and I think it really has a lot of potential as a serious wine in itself. So we're moving now down into the Chêne, which maturation of our wines happens.
Reasons, we're going to, you can tell us a little bit about the fact that so many of our wines do go into barrel, even though that's not very customary in the region.
Absolutely. I mean, on the left-hand side here, this is called a demi-nuit. It's a 600-litre barrique, and we actually use it for the vinification and maturation of one of our top whites called Alio. The idea is, by having this sort of marriage with the cooper, they make the barrels, as it were, we select a barrique specially for particular parcel of our wine, and we work very closely with each of these coopers in order to allow the wine to mature and develop, which is incredibly important where we are. I think when you're as high up as you are, you have that lovely backbone of acidity Nicole was talking about, but at the same time that sort of richness and maturity for being as far south as we are. The wines that we create are quite big, especially in their early stages, and that period of élevage is extremely important. It's actually one of the reasons why we decided to, for our two top cuvées, Abelard and Eloise, which we'll be tasting shortly, we actually release them only when we think they're ready to drink. So we actually are now, we've released the 2012 vintage, which is what we're going to go up to taste. And we've done that from the very first year. So that period of élevage for us is absolutely crucial. Heading up back into daylight. And into the tasting room.
So Dani, why don't we come around and give people a little idea of our range, and then let's just talk a bit more about Abelard and Eloise, since they're really the flagship reds.
Absolutely. So apart from the rosé, which we saw the tanks for downstairs, they also have a period of maturation in demi-nuit that we saw. We also have an 100% Viognier, which is quite a precise mineral expression of the grape variety. I know that a lot of people, it's a bit like the Marmite of grape varieties out here. People either really love it or really hate it. I think we strike a nice balance that makes it quite accessible to pretty much everyone who enjoys a good bottle of white. But we also have our top white cuvée, Alliot, which is predominantly Roussanne, with a little bit of Grenache Blanc and a little bit of Marsanne, which was fermented, as we saw in the demi-nuit downstairs.
How did it get its name?
Oh, good question. We have some strange names for our wines, I'll grant you that, but Alliot was actually the name of the gentleman who used to blow glass on the property in the 1400s. So often a lot of people would come to areas that were heavily wooded because it was very helpful to have the wood and the charcoal in the glass blowing process. So we found lots of little glass vials. I remember when I was a kid finding them in the rubbish, which was quite fun. We have some in the house. And I thought this was a lovely nod to the history of the place to name our top white wine after the gentleman that used to live here. So he was very important to our story. And then of course Astrolab, which is a wine that's predominantly Grenache and Syrah, and quote unquote, I guess you say, the sort of baby of our family of red wines.
Why did we name him that way?
Well, Abelard and Eloise, which Nicole you were talking about a little bit earlier on, actually had a son called Astrolab, and apparently he was a vigneron. It's been quite hard to track down information about him, admittedly. He's a bit of a mysterious figure, but we were quite excited when we found that. So we thought that our sort of more teenage wine in all of the cuvées in the gamme that we have would be named after him. And I thought today we'd taste the 2012 vintages of his parents, Abelard and Anne's.
Should we start with the mama?
I'll start with the mum. And one of the things, sorry to interrupt, I love this wine so much, it's really hard to hold back on a deep dive. But one of the things I've always loved, and I don't know how you feel about this, but about this cuvée is just that we decided in the early years to take this wine, even though it's one of our top wines, outside of the appellation system, which was totally crazy at the time, no?
At the time it was very scary because we were just starting out and we got so excited with the advisors that we had about the potential in the winery, but we wanted to have that freedom to mix and match the parcelle exactly as we wished. And so we decided that it was important for us to put aside a lot of the preconceived notions that we might have from working in this region and look at the potential from that vineyard to mix and match exactly as we should. So because our Syrah has such a Northern Rhone style that we really appreciate, we also think that it's an opportunity to have really a little splash of a white wine, because that's typically what they do in the Northern Rhone. And since we have 1 foot in the Southern Rhone, 1 foot in the Northern Rhone, the Syrah was going to be our homage to the Northern Rhone.
And then I suppose my uncle and aunt, who are also the core of the production here, Jean-Louis, who's the winemaker, with my cousin Hugo, and my aunt Bénédicte, who works in the vineyard and makes sure everything goes to plan. She's such a strong woman and I really look up to her. And one of the things they decided to do for the 2011 vintage onwards was actually use Roussanne in the blend. And I think I haven't come across, I don't think, any Syrah Roussanne blends in my life. And I thought that was such an interesting and unique take on our terroir. You get this gorgeous, I mean, on the nose, the perfume from the Roussanne comes through quite strongly, but then on the palate, you get this gorgeous mouthfeel, this sort of opulence on the mouthfeel, as well as the freshness that you would expect from how high up we are in our altitude here. So it's a unique sort of contradiction in itself, but I love that it has this femininity in the perfume.
Great food wine. What would you pair these with? You know, we always like to joke that Eloise likes feathers and Abelard likes fur. Feathers because it's more delicate, the white meats, duck, goose, turkey, all of that. But you know, do you like it with those lighter flavors?
Absolutely, or lamb as well. I find this goes deliciously with lamb. And one of the things that this wine does very well as it ages is you get also these sort of truffly notes coming through as well.
Yes.
Sous-bois, that sort of forest floor, autumnal mulchiness in a very delicious sense. It's a very French concept, I think. And so I find that, you know, you can pair it with things that are quite sort of lively, like truffle, later on as well in its lifespan. I find it very versatile in that respect.
Don't you find that even as it ages, sometimes it just becomes like liquid truffle juice? It's one of the very strange things about this wine is the truffle character that does help it a lot with the pairing.
And of course, if you come to visit, which we hope some of you will, one of the sort of truffle meccas of France is down the hill. Carpentras, Verrière. I think they even have a sort of truffle mass once a year. So in this respect, it's a very useful pairing to be able to provide.
And a lovely time of year to come as well.
So on to Abelard. And, you know, I think as Nicole was saying earlier on, there are so many contradictions inherent in this vineyard site that it made sense for us to sort of split these two ideas, this idea of altitude and elegance, as well as this idea of sort of richness, opulence, and southern sun, into two different cuvées. And I think, you know, Abelard really expresses that opulence that you might expect to find in the Southern Rhone, but in a very sort of unique way at the same time. It's predominantly Grenache, so about 80–85% with a little seasoning of Syrah, but I mean quite muscular.
Yeah, so back to that idea of the yin and yang, right? They're just sort of reverse blends, and they complement different aspects of the vineyard. But you think that's a fair way to say they're sort of expressing the two faces of what we have out here on our best most drained areas. They're right at towards the entrance of the property, and our main vineyards are are actually on the other side that are, you know, northern facing, so it's a perfect place for whites. But this is a very, very great area for Grenache and Syrah because it's got that great exposure, you know?
For people that are really interested in Grenache, which I think has long been a sort of undersung hero of the viticultural world, I mean, what I love about our Grenache, pretty much every year you get these almost black fruit characteristics that maybe one might not expect from Grenache. Usually people tend to think, you know, cranberry, red fruits, and this really veers more into sort of cassis. You get that cigar box sort of spice on it, but it does veer more into black fruit territory. And I think with our altitude and the way our phenolics develop, that's quite interesting and quite unique to where we are.
Yeah, I think it also gives it a certain gravitas, because one of the things that's so interesting about working this high up is that your grapes get concentrated from the wind that kind of dries them out and takes out some of the extra water in them, instead of from the sun, which is going to really be bringing up the alcohol levels. And so getting that concentration and that fleshiness, but also having that cooler, the more restrained style, I think is very good. So
we've had, I guess, a lot of stories as we've been walking around about the winery and about the family and about, you know, the way that we grow our grapes and what makes them unique. I know that one of the more unique topics around our wines, just from chatting to people in the world, is this idea of bunnies. Would you like to, a bit of an out there question, but would you like to go into that a little bit more?
she loves teasing me about the bunnies because a few years ago we started this little international bunny hunt. And if you take a look at our label, there's actually a lot of serious stuff that's hiding in here. There are so many symbols that are relating to everything, because when we were starting out, we thought it was so important to try to communicate to anyone, even if they didn't have a chance to be here, all the different layers of meaning that come together to try to make a wine like this. So the topography, the history, the people, the philosophy of winemaking. There are some references to everything from some of the top thinkers and Cicero to the great painters, the big ideas which come down from one generation to the other. So on the front side, we hid a certain number of little rabbits in that label. There are actually 5 white bunnies and 1 black hare, and every 10 years we add a 6th one, a next one. So the reason for that is that because of all the work that we do with the biosphere to protect that ecology and to try to have a very well functioning ecosystem, the rabbits are actually halfway between the big predators and the microorganisms. So they're a quick symbol for that work that we're doing to protect and preserve that nature. However, the fun part is that anyone who finds them all becomes a member of the secret society, the International Bunny Club. So if you want to come here and find them this way, that would be great. We'd love to have you to the property. And if you want to just write to us and tell us that you found them, we'll be in touch with you with your little prize to thank you for that. And I guess it brings us to the main question about how we like to work here, that spirit of collaboration and welcoming everyone into a little community around this very special project. So I guess for us it's very important to have that in this philosophy that you can see at the bottom, which is non mihi, non tihi, sed nobis. It means not mine, not yours, but ours. And it is fundamental to the way we like to think.
And I know, for instance, Nicole, you've spent so many years putting together this label. I think it took us about 2 years to finish it when we first started. And I remember that the family was ready to throttle you. We said, no, wait, let me finish. Let me do another year. And this was so important for us when we started, because if you can imagine being first generation winemakers in the middle of a forest, 10-minute drive away from the nearest town, it's beautiful from a viticultural standpoint. And then obviously from a wine standpoint, we just needed to show what we were about and to let people know that we were doing something a little bit different where we are. So
we were really convinced that it's a little hidden gem, and we hope that you'll come and visit us and you'll find out for yourselves and see if you agree with us.
Let us know and I'll send you a map.
Should we take some questions?
If there are any questions as well, we're really happy to take them. I know that Brian's been, I should have introduced Brian at the beginning, but I know he's been answering your questions on the Facebook side, but if there are any that you would like to ask us directly, we're really happy to take them.
Okay, so what we'll do is we'll make sure you can get in touch with us at nicole.rollet@chênebleu.com or Camille or info at any way you want to get in touch. We'd love to welcome you. We've heard such good things about Wine Paths for so many years, and when we finally met the people behind it, we were so impressed with our organization, and for us it's a real privilege to work with such a great company. So we know you're in very good hands.
Until we see you,